Howdy, this is Lemmy with RevZilla. Welcome to episode 3 of our Sportster Parts Modification series. In case you're just joining us, let me bring you up to speed on what we've accomplished thus far. In episode 1, we played dress up with a few different exhausts, and we finally settled in the stainless 2-in-1 system you can see on the Sporty over here. In episode 2, we played around with air and fuel. We stuck a little Cool Guy air cleaner on there, and we also threw a fuel controller on our bike to bring our air-fuel ratio back in line for a little better performance. Now today, for episode 3, let's direct our attention back to our initial review of the 16 Sportster. While Harley did make some big improvements on the suspension of this motorcycle, there were still some areas that were lacking. We did like the front pretty decently, but the rear suspension suffered from a couple different problems. The first problem was a very harsh ride. Even though this thing was a little bit better than our previous iteration of the Sportster we had as a studio bike, there were still some improvements left to be made. Now, my thoughts were that that problem was compounded by the initial problem, which was the fact that this suspension just doesn't have very much travel. These shocks are fairly short on here, especially when compared to Sportsters of yesteryear. So today in episode 3, we're bringing you back out onto the motorcycle so you can get my real live thoughts on some of the products we're going to install to help tighten up the rear suspension of this bike, make the ride a little bit more comfortable, and also give us some of that ground clearance that I've been looking for this entire time. But before we get to those, I'd like to talk for just a moment about the installation on this. Now, putting a set of shocks on your Sportster is not difficult if it's something you're considering. I'm going to call it a 2-bearder on our BSD, or beard scale of difficulty. It's not incredibly difficult to spin the bolts themselves on here in order to swap out a set of shocks. In fact, the only thing that kicks this up into 2-beard territory is that you might need a couple of pieces of specialty equipment. You need to get the tail end of your Sporty up in the air. Now, you don't need a full-on lift like we've got here, but you will notice we've got a chock underneath the frame, and I've got some blocks and shims helping to bear the weight of some of the suspension items here, the swing arm, the wheel, the brake, tire, and associated items. Other than that, though, it's a very straightforward install, and most of you should have no problem with it. If you're on the fence as to whether or not you can complete this task, though, check out our shock swap video, where we actually do change out a set of shocks on our Sportster and show you everything you need to know to get the job done by yourself. Now that we've got that out of the way, though, let's check out some of these products. Swing around with me to the table. We'll talk about some of the things we've got up here. So we've got a pretty big smattering of shocks here. There's a couple different brands that I really wanted to get my fingers on. We've got an assortment of brands of shock, as well as different levels of adjustability. And then one of my favorite things here is we've got a wide variety, too, of heights. You'll notice we have everything from short shocks to super tall ones back here, in an effort to toy just a little bit with our Sportster's ride height. Bringing that rear end back up, helping to level off the bike, should give us some of that ground clearance we're after, and it also should make the sweet spot of the suspension a little bit bigger because we'll have some more travel there. I'm pretty excited to get a lot of these onto the motorcycle and let you guys know exactly how these things are performing. So at this stage of the game, I'm ready to get the tools out of the box and start wrenching on this puppy. While I'm doing that, make sure that you click that subscribe button so you can catch each and every episode of the Sporty Mod series as we're rolling them out, as well as check out some of the other cool reviews we do here at RevZilla.com. You guys know we're constantly beating up on bikes, on gear, and on parts, and reporting back to you on exactly how those items hold up. Let's get cracking, what do you say? Up a set of Progressive 970 shocks on here, and after a minor fitment aberration, a little spacer differential between what Progressive was calling for and what we used, I gotta say I'm pretty impressed. Now you notice, take a peek at these babies. They're piggyback shocks. They look racy. They've got this awesome bronze finish on there. That's racy looking too. But best of all, these things are absolutely performing. They're giving me great feel in the back. I don't feel like I'm getting jarred every time I hit a bump, and we've hit a couple of real teeth clickers. But I feel like they're a great mate for the front suspension. These two are working in concert really nicely. Now keep in mind, I did have to dial in my suspension settings just a little bit here. I've got 10 threads worth of preload showing, so I had to crank that down a little bit more from stock in order to deal with my increased weight. The other thing I've got too, I'm a couple clicks up on the preload, but ultimately these gave me the ground clearance that I was so badly looking for. I can throw this thing over in a corner, and while it's definitely not a sport bike, there's a lot of fun to be had on this Sportster as it sits now. Let's go try out another set of shocks, huh? I've got a set of 10-inch Lick Cycle Gutter Punk shocks on here. These are shorter than our factory shocks, but I still wanted to give them a whirl because they're fairly new to us at RevZilla, and they're also new to me personally. I haven't run a set. These shocks I'm quickly developing a love-hate relationship with. I can't really tell how I feel about them just yet. I love them because the suspension on these is actually surprisingly good. They're dealing with my weight very, very nicely. It's a firm, taut feeling. However, where I really am not enjoying these shocks is the travel. I have no travel. If you take a peek on my other side, you can see I've got about an inch of clearance between the belt guard and one of the reflectors there. An inch of travel just isn't enough to do a great job giving a good ride, and it's also not really enough to give us the clearance that we're gonna need. I'm kind of terrified of taking a right turn right now because I think I'm gonna scrape some things. So while these are a cool set of shocks, I don't think they're for us for this build. So let's go try out another set. Got a set of Legend Revo A's on here, 14-inch shocks on the backside of this thing. Now before we get into it, I should tell you guys that I love these shocks. We use them on a couple of the ZLA house bikes. I used a set of Revo A's on one of my old shovel heads. I love these in every application we've used them, and our Sportster is absolutely no different. Check them out back there. That 14-inch height means I'm picking that ass end of this bike up quite a bit. Even with me crushing down that rear suspension, I still have some travel back there, which I'm really enjoying. Now, of course, I feel like Goldilocks on this right now. Not too soft, not too hard. This suspension is doing its job exactly. I'm really digging how Legend has managed to fix up this suspension. I also got lots of ground clearance. I've been hitting this traffic circle you guys haven't seen, but I'm going through it as fast as I can, and I'm not even touching down my hero blobs. I'm really digging these 14-inch shocks. The only bad thing I can say about them is that at 14 inches worth of height, I got some serious gangster lean when I got this Sportster out there on the Jiffy stand. Other than that, though, I'm satisfied. Let's go try out another set of shocks. Okay, I'm fatting up a set of Burley Stiletto shocks on here. These things are 15-inch length shocks, the biggest, tallest shocks we've tested thus far. So if you take a peek back here, that 15 inches of shock definitely afforded us quite a bit more suspension travel. We did also get some ground clearance out of this, but if you look here, it's kind of an optical illusion. It looks like my pipe down there is sitting straight, but that's because of the megaphone nature of it. The frame, believe it or not, is actually canted downward quite a bit. The rear is now higher than the front. As such, it handles a little bit more quickly now. Still though, again, we got lots and lots of ground clearance for pretty short coin. Those of you guys who are putting together a cafe bike or maybe some sort of a dirt tracker themed thing, this is gonna be the shock you wanna look at if you're not trying to spend a bunch of coin. Let's get back to the studio and talk about what's gonna wind up on the bike. Getting to try all these shocks on our Sportster really was a lot of fun, but it was also kind of eye-opening. I learned a few things, and not all of them were groundbreaking, but they were important nonetheless. The first thing I realized is that ride height was important, but we didn't want to go too far in any one direction or the other. Too far slammed or too far picked up wasn't necessarily where I wanted to be for the type of riding that I'm going to be doing here. The other thing I learned too, perhaps unsurprisingly, is that cost and benefits are pretty closely related. More expensive shocks tended to have a little more adjustability as well as a much nicer ride. Now when it came down to the Gutter Punk as well as the Stiletto, you can see here the wide difference between these. These are probably a little bit too far in either direction for what I was doing with this motorcycle. But these really do represent a good value. If you don't want to throw out a bunch of money, but you do want to change the ride height pretty drastically on your Sporty, both of these were awesome options depending on which direction you wanted to move your Sportster. So for me, it was a real toss-up between those Legend Revo A's as well as the Progressive 970s. I wound up deciding the Progressive 970s were probably going to fit the bill best for us for a couple of reasons. Some subjective, some objective. Now subjectively speaking, I think these are just a really nice looking shock. They blend in well with the blacked out nature of the iron, but this little bit of bronze trim on here lets people know that this is not a stock shock setup on here. Plus, I think we can all agree that piggyback shocks just look racy. However, that works well too. Keeping the gas and oil isolated from the shock body itself meant that this thing was performing well over every single pothole and tooth clicker I could ride over. I was really pleased with how the 970s did. Now, one of the other reasons too I liked the 970s as opposed to the Revo A's had to do with preload adjustment. Revo A's have a toolless preload adjustment, which is pretty cool. The Progressives, however, require a tool, but that tool is included in the box. And I also thought it was easier even with the tool to adjust the preload on here. That's going to be important for those of you who are frequently carrying a load or perhaps taking a passenger. You may find yourself changing preload up fairly frequently. So that brings me to episode 4, where we're going to be discussing fresh seats. We're going to get something that's more comfortable for my Tookus, but we're also going to be looking for something too for a passenger to use as well. One of the other things we're going to touch on too is how to add passenger foot pegs to your iron. These babies roll out of the factory without any accommodations for your favorite pillion. And then of course in episode 5 we're pulling out all the stops. I'm going to make some aesthetic modifications, and I have a couple tricks up my sleeve I have a feeling a couple of you didn't see coming. Now, if at any point you're interested in some of the suspension products you saw up here, or some of the ones you didn't, click that info button on your desktop or your mobile device, and we'll show you detailed product reviews on each of those pieces. Remember too to subscribe to us so you catch episode 4 and 5 as we're rolling them out. I'm Lemmy, and I'm out of here.